Hi, my name is Mark Anthony Artoraldo, and I'm going to report the sampling design. Sampling design. The research design must explain the sampling design to be adapted for the research study. The sampling design must be selected in such a way that it gives full representation to the population, so that the findings of the research can be generalized for the populations. There are various probability and non-probability sampling techniques that can be adapted for the purpose of sample selection. The research design should clearly indicate the sampling technique to be employed in the research study. Advantages of sampling design. Sampling ensures convenience, collections of intensive and exhaustive data, suitability in limited resources, and better rapport. In addition to this, sampling has the following advantages. We have 8 here. First is the low cost of sampling. If data were to be collected for the entire populations, the cost will be quite high. A sample is a small proportion of a population, so the cost will be lower if the data is collected for a sample population, of which is a big advantage. Second is the less time consuming in sampling. Use of sampling takes less time also. It consumes less time than census technique, tabulations, analysis, and etc. Take much less time in the case of a sample than in the case of a populations. Third, scope of sampling is high. The investigator is concerned with the generalizations of data to study a whole population in order to arrive at generalization would be impractical. Some populations are so large that their characteristic could not be measured. Before the measurement has been completed, the population would have changed, but the process of sampling makes it possible to arrive at generalizations by studying the variables within a relatively small proportion of the populations. Fourth is the accuracy of data is high. Having drawn a sample and computed the desired descriptive statistics, it is possible to determine the stability of the obtained sample value. A sample represents the population from which it is drawn. It permits a high degree of accuracy due to a limited area of operations. Moreover, careful executions of fieldwork is possible. Ultimately, the results of sampling studies turns out to be sufficiently accurate. Then, fifth, organizations of convenience. Organizational problems involved in sampling are very few. Since sample is of a small size, vast facilities are not required. Sampling is therefore economical in respect of resources. Study of sample involves less space and equipment. Then, 6. The intensive and exhaustive data. In sample studies, measurements of measurements or observations are made of a limited number. So, intensive and exhaustive data are collected. Then, 7. The suitable and limited resources. The resources available within an organization may be limited. Studying the entire universe is not viable. The population can be satisfactorily covered through sampling. Where limited resources exist, Use of sampling is an appropriate strategy while conducting marketing research. Then, the last one is the Vetter report. An effective research study requires a good rapport between the researcher and the respondents. When the population of the study is large, the problem of rapport arises. But manageable samples permit the researcher to establish adequate rapport with the respondents. That are the advantages of sampling design in research. Then the limitations of sampling. The serious limitation of the sampling method is that it involves bias selection and thereby leads us to draw erroneous conclusions. Bias arises when the method of selections of sample employed is faulty. Relative small samples properly selected may be such more reliable than large samples poorly selected. Then proceed tayo. Planning a sample survey. We have 10 guide in order to create or to make planning a sample survey. First is objectives of the survey. Second, population to be sampled. Third, data to be collected. Fourth, degree of precision to be desired. Fifth is the questionnaire and the choice of data collectors. Sixth is the selection of the sample design. Next, seventh is sampling units. Eight, the pre-test. And nine, organization of the fieldwork. And the last one is the summary and analysis of the data. Next, determination of sample size. Sample size determination is the mathematical estimation of the number of subjects or units to be included in a study. Then, when a representative sample is taken from populations, the findings are generalized to be population. Then, optimum sample size determination is required for the following reasons. The first one is to follow for appropriate analysis. The second is to provide the desired level of accuracy. Then the third is to allow validity of significance tests. Then sample design specifies for every sample there is a probability of being drawn. Types of sampling design, we have two types here, the scientific sampling and the second one is the non-scientific sampling. And scientific sampling, we have five different types of scientific sampling here. When we say scientific sampling, we are going to follow the methods that the science use in order to collect data for our research. So we have five here. The first is restricted random sampling. A method of sampling is described which is a compromise between systematic sampling and stratified random sampling. It has less potential for bias than systematic sampling and also avoids the practical problems associated with stratified random sampling. The next one is the unrestricted random sampling. This method assumes that each site has an equal chance of being part of the sample selected. Make a list of all project sites, perhaps by alphabetical order. Every project site is given a number. Random sampling isn't always the most convenient method of choosing a sample. So, let us discuss the difference between restricted and unrestricted sampling. Unrestricted sampling occurs when elements are selected individually and directly from the populations, whereas restricted sampling occurs when elements are chosen using a specific methodology, as in probability sampling or complex probability sampling. Then, proceed tayo kay stratified random sampling. This method of sampling is sometimes used if there are wide variations in site performance within a certain geographic location or type of distribution site. Example is a health center or schools. All the sites are grouped into segments, each having some uniform, easily identifiable characteristics. Each, each segment is sampled separately using unrestricted random sampling methods. Then proceed tayo kay systematic sampling, a statistical method involving the selections of elements from an ordered sampling frame. The most common form of systematic sampling is an equal probability method. In this approach, progressions through the list is treated circularly, with a return to the top once the end of the list is passed. Then the uh, last type of scientific sampling is the multi-stage sampling, a complex form of cluster sampling. Cluster sampling is a type of sampling which involves dividing the population into groups or clusters na tinatawag natin. Then one or more clusters are chosen at random and everyone with the chosen cluster is sampled. Then the non-scientific sampling. We have three types of non-scientific sampling. The first is the purposive sampling, second convenience sampling, and the last one is the quota sampling. Purposive sampling is the type of non-scientific sampling is based on selecting the individuals as samples according to the purposes of the research as his controls. Then, the convenience sampling is also referred to as haphazard, haphazard or accidental sampling. The process of selecting some people to be part of a sample because they are readily available, not because they are most representative of the population being studied. Example of convenience samplings, we have, for example, number 1, female moviegoers sitting in the first row of a movie theater. And the next one is the first 100 customer to enter a department store. Then, last one is the first 3 callers in a radio. That is the sample of convenience sampling. Then the last one is the quota sampling. This is one of the most common forms of non-probability sampling. Sampling is done until a specific number of units or we called quotas for various subpopulations have been selected. To choose a quota sample, first, we divide the population into strata or groups of individuals that are similar in some way that is important to the response. Second is to choose a separate sample from each stratum. This does not have to be random sample. Then the last one is combine these samples to form a quota sample. And I think it conclude my reports, and thank you and keep safe everyone.